Good morning. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about new products, product development in Chapter 10. And then, according to the syllabi, I believe the second exam is next Tuesday. Is that correct?
Yep.
So I have the test right here. I will read the questions from it to you so that you can all get 100 on it. I took the test myself. This morning I made 100, so we know that it's fair and balanced, just like Fox News, right? So I rest assured that you all will do the same on Tuesday, that you'll all make 100 on it. So we're going to talk about, like I said, brand or new products today. We will have the second exam on Tuesday, and I'll do a review at the end of the hour. Why do companies need to continually come up with new ideas and new products? People get tired of building products, yeah. Just like we talked about last time, products have a life cycle. And depending on the product, that life cycle may be very short or very long, right? I think if you looked at Coca-Cola, so I pulled up Coca-Cola here because we talked about that last time. I think the life cycle of Coca-Cola was introduced something like 100 years ago, is pretty long. But you can also have product life cycles, fads, that come and go, like that, right? That have very short product life cycles. And so you have to constantly be engaged with developing new stuff for consumers because things change. We've seen rapid changes in technology. And so these are just some of the products that Coca-Cola has, some of the brands that they have. I think I talked about last time, one of the products that they still carry, even though it's not very popular anymore, is a product called Tab. Now I would say they're in the getting rid of it phase, but there are still some die-hard Tab drinkers out there. And so the last time I checked, you can still buy Tab. Have anybody tried a Tab? It's really god awful. But there's this, die-hard group, I guess, of boomers that still like Tab. What is replacing a lot of these carbonated beverages? Bottled waters, right? Mineral water, things like that. So you have to constantly be coming up with new ideas. Some scholars have tried to estimate how many new ideas businesses need to be coming up with constantly in order to stay relevant in the marketplace. And I think that's really a difficult number to come up with. But some suggest that, for example, you need to be generating 25 new ideas a month in order to stay relevant. And how, if you think about just the things that you go to every day, how many new things are they trying constantly? Think about something like McDonald's. What is McDonald's? And I think I suggested this last time, that McDonald's is actually, I think, trying to reposition themselves in the mind of the consumer. So what are they trying to do? Yes? Yeah, they're coming up with a healthier menu as a result of the fact that they have to tell you what the calorie counts are. And by the way, the calorie counts on a lot of things and a lot of restaurants are way off. Because if they increase, for example, the Chili's menu, I think they found in one study that I was reading up to 20%, I think that's correct, up to 20% variance in the calories depending on, for example, how much dressing one employee put on the grilled chicken sandwich, right? Can increase the amount of calories exponentially. And so they're coming up with healthier options, things like apple slices for the Happy Meal, salads, right? Grilled chicken instead of crispy chicken. These are all in response to a change in people's preferences in the market, a recognition that you need to maybe eat healthier, right? So you need to constantly be scanning the environment and coming up with new ideas. The first step in this new product development is the strategy stage. And this is where you combine two things that we've talked about previously. Again, I will not, except for the final, which is optional, I will not test you from one test period about stuff in the previous test period, but it is all sort of cumulative in that it all sort of comes together. And we've talked about this before. You combine in new product development the SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, with an environmental scan. How are people's preferences changing? And market research on that. Right? Where should these new ideas come from? That's the second step, is idea generation. Where should they come from? In this new era of marketing, where we talk about value co-creation, where can you get ideas from? In the past, again, product-driven companies put out the product and thought you would buy it. Apple still does that, or did. They've now started to engage, now that Steve Jobs is no longer with them, in marketing research, and what have they found out as a result? Has the iPhone 6, I haven't gotten mine yet, I'm just sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for it to be delivered in the mail. Is it radically different than this one? No? When they came out with the iPhone 5, one of the comedians from the late night talk shows went out and was doing something, I can't remember which one it was, but was talking to people and showing them what was the iPhone 4 and saying it was the 5, and watching people and they're like, oh yeah, the screen is so much bigger and it's so much better and I can see so much clearer. Yeah, and it was the iPhone 4, that 4S that he was tricking them with. So apart from those companies like Apple, where you have a real genius who can be sort of a market leader, where should these ideas come from in this era of value co-creation? What? Yeah, from making the consumer a part of the team. Now, how are you going to do that? Do focus groups, do engage in marketing research, right? See what kinds of things they're interested in. If you're a big company and you sell through, towards the end of the course, we'll talk about channels of distribution. And it's the part of the course that we won't tell Dr. Chinchev that I said this, but I think it's kind of boring, but it's sort of the roots of marketing started in distribution channels. I think I told you that. So if you have a network of retailers and stuff like that, you can ask your what? Channel partners what people are saying, what they're talking about, right? That's a useful source of information. So looking at it from the customer standpoint, getting other members in the channel to tell you what kinds of requests they're having. Internal firm sources, doing research and development, right? What's a big change as a result of certain outbreaks, for example, in the healthcare industry that's driven the need for new products and new product development in healthcare? Ebola, right? That's a huge scare. Anybody going to Dallas? The OU Texas game is this weekend, isn't it? Anybody running down there? You are? You're going to risk it? Why not? Okay. They keep telling us it's not an airborne pathogen. But as a result of this and the fact that it's now come to the United States, all of these sorts of things in the past have been contained primarily in Africa, and we've been very fortunate. Now we've actually got outbreaks that are starting, with the gentleman in Dallas. This has led to a need in the market environment for what? Testing, so that you can test whether or not people... The current test, apparently, as I understand it, requires that you actually be symptomatic before they can positively determine whether or not you have the antibodies, which suggests that you have Ebola. Is that a good thing, or do we need better testing? I think there's going to be increased push for better testing, so that when these people get on the plane, before they get on the plane, what are they doing to test now? Anybody listen to what Homeland Security is having them do? At these countries like Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Africa, what are they doing? They're not doing a blood test. They're taking their temperature to see if they have a fever, right? And then asking them if they have been exposed to anybody who has Ebola. What could be wrong with that kind of strategy? Yeah, there's some conflicting testimony as to whether or not the gentleman who developed Ebola once he got into Dallas actually lied to authorities about having been exposed to somebody who was infected with Ebola. So this is, an example of where marketing research in the pharmaceutical industry is going to start looking as a result of an external environmental threat that we face, which is this horrible virus, right? This third stage, and there are about 5 questions on the exam that will ask you specifically which stage, which step would this occur in the market, new product development phase, is screening and evaluation. So you look at testing it internally first, and then testing it with customers and clients, trying to take a product to a test market. And there are certain markets in the United States for packaged goods that they use because they're a nice mixture of the demographics of the United States and have a high rate of success in responding. With regard to other things, we call services products. How easy is it to test those? It can be really difficult, right? Let's think about medical services. How easy can you test new medical services? So again, returning to the Ebola crisis, since it's in the news, there is a bunch of debate as to whether or not the gentleman in Dallas received the most effective treatment. And there, the Reverend Jesse Jackson is at least intimating that maybe as a result of his national origin and ethnicity, he didn't receive the same treatment. Because the 2 people that have now survived Ebola were given what? They were given an experimental antiviral drug that seemed to be working. And this gentleman in Dallas was given a different experimental drug. Why was that? They didn't have enough of the first experimental drug, as I understand it, on hand. So with regard to services, how do you test these when you bring them to market? How would you evaluate new services? What could be a problem with that? Evaluating quality and credence properties. Think about, for example, my profession, the legal profession. How do you evaluate whether or not you have a good lawyer?
If you want to do the case.
Oh, if he wins the case? Is every case winnable though?
No.
No? When the law changes and you come up with a new idea for how to argue a case, it may be difficult, right? And because services are so unique in that they're one of the things that is hard to monitor. The 4th stage is doing the business analysis. Then developing, testing, and then finally the last stage is commercialization, bringing those things to actual market. Now, in the consumer packaged goods market, your text tells you that only 3% of the products that are brought to market are actually successful. And think about this. Why would that be? How many products have you seen pop up on a shelf and maybe a year later they're not there? Can you think of any products that have disappeared from shelves? Yeah.
Guitar Hero.
Guitar Hero. Why did Guitar Hero? I didn't realize it had disappeared.
It was oversaturated. They released like 10 games within like 2 years or something.
That were all similar? Okay. It wasn't violent enough, maybe? Right? It's hard to compete with Grand Theft Auto, where you get to blow people's heads off and do all kinds of stuff like that. Well, it kind of depends on the product or good or service that we're marketing. In the business consumer market, we can classify goods in a number of ways. Convenience products. These are items that are frequently purchased. They are not given a lot of thought in terms of that consumer decision-making process. Again, this is how it all sort of integrates with consumer behavior, right? That rational actor model applies less to these types of products than it does to shopping products, which maybe involve a higher risk and a higher degree of search, right, for it. You also have specialty products, and then you have unsought products. What are unsought products? Items that you generally don't know about or don't think about until you need them. Things like what? What's an unsought product? Caskets. Any of you running out and picking out your own casket? It's kind of creepy. People do it. I think it's kind of morbid, right? So with regard to the various types of products will depend on how we bring them to market and whether or not they're successful. Why do products fail? Why would a product fail when we bring it to market? Coke. And again, examples abound in companies, even big companies, that have brought products to market that were not terribly successful. New Coke. Why did they bring New Coke out? Well, I think they thought that maybe they were losing ground to Pepsi. Anybody a Pepsi drinker in here? Oh, okay, we've got two communists. Every red-blooded American knows that Coca-Cola is, the only caffeinated, caramelized beverage that you should drink. No, I'm kidding. Pepsi did this Pepsi challenge. You all are probably too young to remember this, but they gave a taste test, and people actually did prefer Pepsi to Coke in those taste tests. But what did they do in those taste tests? And this is an example of how marketing research can be problematic. They give you what? They give you a little amount. And people like the little amount if it's about an ounce. But they don't like it for more than about an ounce. Why? And the reason I don't like Pepsi is it's too sweet. And New Coke was, I think, too sweet. So this is an example of a product that came out. It was an utter failure. And Coca-Cola went back to manufacturing the original Coke, right? So there's not enough differentiation in the market. When New Coke came out, I don't think it was different enough from Pepsi to have a really big impact in the market. So lack of differentiation. And differentiation in a market where you have a lot of competitors is going to be enormously important. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of competitors to Coke, and Coke certainly has the vast majority of the market share. Coke and Pepsi have the vast majority of the market share. But how many of you have been to Pops out on 2nd Street? You go out, which is old Route 66. How many types of pop can you get in the market? Yeah, there's way too many. They advertise that they've got thousands of different types of pop. Right? So differentiation is important. Maybe it's not new compared to existing products. This happened with MP3 players. Lots of companies, after Apple came out with the iPod, tried to come out with digital music players, and most of those were not very successful. Why? Yeah, it was established. Apple had the market. Why did Apple have a big part of the market?
They've already established.
Well, it's also because they had the program to go along with it, the iTunes software and stuff like that, which was really easy to use. And so there wasn't a big enough differentiation between the products. Again, you should look at what your text talks about, newness in legal terms. This is part of that environmental scan. What constitutes new and improved? The Federal Trade Commission has an opinion on what is new, and they said that it should be limited to use with a product that's up to 6 months on the market, has been released for 6 months on the market. After that, it's not really new. There's problems with this, right? In terms of what constitutes really new. Are we just adding on? I'm not sure that Apple is really coming up with a new product in the iPhone 6. It's really just sort of an extension of the science already there, isn't it? Is it really all that much different? Huh?
You get another row of apps.
You get another row of apps. You get a whole new, set of things that you can waste your time on, besides just Angry Birds and Candy Crush Saga. Right? I'm not sure that's really all that new. So insignificant point of difference is one of those things. No economic access to buyers. This is problematic in particularly the globalization of products, right? You may have a lot of people that may want it, but if they don't have the ability to get it, economically, that can be a problem. Bad timing or poor execution in the marketing mix are two other things that can lead to problems with product. Can you think of a car company that recently went out of business?
Hummer?
Saturn. Yeah, well, Hummer went out of business as well. Why did Hummer go out of business? Do you think it's a lack of differentiation between the Hummer and other large SUVs? I think they really were different. But maybe Hummer's timing was bad. Why?
Gas mileage.
Yeah, they only got 8 miles to the gallon, and what was happening with gas prices? They were skyrocketing, right? We were approaching $4 a gallon, which, by the way, oil is at an all-time low right now for the significant period of time. It's obviously been a lot cheaper in the 90s than it is now, but we're seeing decreases in cost of gas. What's the gas price in Oklahoma City right now? Yeah, it's way under $3, and it's like $2.79 at the 7-Eleven up by the Homeland. So bad timing, lack of commitment on the part of the company. So for example, with Saturn, what I think happened was this was bad marketing mix. They started this company and it never really got the full support of the General Motors headquarters, right? Because it was sort of off on its own and it was never properly supported. And that, I think, was one of the things that led to the problems with that. Poor product quality. This happened with American cars in the 1980s and 1990s. The Japanese absolutely overtook the market. And it was a total flip because before that, cars from Japan were not viewed as being very good. But the Japanese government invested heavily in creating infrastructure for their companies to be able to compete in a global market. And all of a sudden, the quality issues really turned around, and American car companies were the ones in the 1980s and early 90s, I think, that faced serious challenges to the product quality. Are there any questions about product development? We'll talk a little bit more about products when we talk about brands after the second exam. That's just sort of the way things shook out. I want to make sure that we have enough time for the exam review, and I have a meeting with my department chair. So if you want, you're welcome. Again, I'll give you a few minutes to bring your recording devices up here and put them on the table so that you can have that if you want for review. Again, I would recommend, though, that you take notes because you know that you will remember it more.
So that would be embarrassing if
Yeah, I am, of course, videoing this as well, but the camcorder has gone out a couple times, so if you want to make sure that up here, and I will attempt to not move around too much so that the recording devices get all of the information as clearly as possible. Great. All right. So, you should know about consumer behavior and the number of stages that are involved in that process. There are about 4 questions that ask, what is, for example, the first stage in the consumer purchase decision process? What kind of processes are involved in all of the stages? What we might call that. So for example, I called it the rational actor theory. Right? Assuming that people have goals, that in pursuit of those goals they undertake certain steps, at least at a low level of rationality, to achieve those goals. We talked about globalization and the impact globalization is having on even domestic markets, and considerations in those environments that companies have to think about. As we increasingly enter into global markets, understanding the regulatory scheme is very important. So for example, I talked about the National Conference of Commissioners of Uniform State Laws. It's something that they've promulgated that's been adopted by all 50 states in the United States. That's called the Uniform Commercial Code. The UCC requires, for example, that goods being sold over $500 or $5,000, depending on the version of the UCC that the state has adopted, be evidenced by a writing. And this is different in the global context because the United Nations Convention on Contracts doesn't require what we call the statute of frauds in this country. So you should know that. You should know what the dialectic is, the Hegelian dialectic. This idea, for example, in consumer behavior, that you start out with a thesis, which is the rational actor model. In response to that, you get some antithesis, and then a synthesis. There are a number of questions that ask you about substantive examples. For example, a small company that manufactures duct tape wallets called Ducty discovered there's a large demand for the wallets. Clearly some consumers have a favorable evaluation. To have a favorable evaluation, the consumer must first what? What do they need to do? When a perceived difference between a consumer's ideal and an actual situation that occurs is big enough, what will happen in the consumer decision-making process? We talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and with regard to consumer behavior. The idea that needs at lower levels have to be satisfied before the needs at upper levels can be Matt, what is the bottom of the pyramid? So those physiological things like food. What comes up after that? What is a consumer's consistent behavior responses to a situation? What is that called? So understanding differences between things like values, perceptions, personality is important. Which of those kinds of things are more stable? Which of those things we can influence as marketers through marketing stimulation or stimuli? Differences in perception. Why they're important in the market. If a consumer, for example, believes that a product is negatively associated with, it's demeaning, for example, to a particular group, what can that lead to? In thinking about the business-to-business market, how can we get information about business-to-business? There's something called the North American Industrial Classification System that allows you to understand various industries. There are certain digits associated with that. A 6-digit coding system is used. What do the first 2 digits, for example, designate? It's one of the questions. What does the 5th digit designate? In that market, in the business-to-business market, demand is different than in the consumer market. Why is that? What's that called? What type of demand is elastic? Or inelastic? In comparing consumer decision-making to business-to-business decision-making, what are some of the important factors? Things like organizations may more closely resemble that rational actor model because generally there's more than one individual involved in the decision.